Good afternoon. I'm Rich McKeon. Welcome to our Fast Break webinars. We're really pleased you could join us for these fresh insights into value-based healthcare. We're grateful for our co-hosts, the David Eccles School of Business at the University of Utah and the Green Templeton College at the University of Oxford. We're appreciative as well for our contributing sponsors. That'd be J.P. Morgan, Intermountain Healthcare, Select Health, and Leavitt Partners. We hope you'll join us next spring at our symposium, the Global Value-Based Healthcare Symposium on May 12th and 13th. It'll be remotely presented, and it will be the beginning of a year-long discussion on value-based healthcare. This will be an opportunity to transcend the theoretical and jump really into the practical implementation of value-based healthcare. Today we welcome Vince Ventimiglia and Sara Singleton. Vince is the president of Leavitt Partners Collaborative Advocates and also had been a former Assistant Secretary for Legislation at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He has extensive experience on Capitol Hill as members of both the HELP and the Budget committees, where he was a lead staff member there. We welcome as well Sara, who is a principal at Leavitt Partners and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Legislation at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services during the Barack Obama administration. She has as well extensive experience in congressional relations, and we are just appreciative that they join us today. Well, welcome, Vince and Sara. We appreciate your joining us today. You know, we've been through what people have called the most consequential election of our lifetime. For me, that's a long time. For you, not so much. But talk a little bit about President-elect Biden, how he'll govern, and whether he's going to be a centrist or find himself having to move to the left of his party. And Sara, why don't you start, and we'll then ask Vince to comment as well.
Well, we obviously saw a primary season in the Democratic Party that had a whole range of characters, and Biden was amongst the most centrist of them all. Although when you look at his campaign platform, it is more progressive than many of his predecessors. I tend to think that he will be a centrist, that his many decades of experience in the Senate and bipartisan deal making are at his core, and that he's going to want to be in a period of bringing people together to move us forward. So my inclination is that is where he's going to be, but he will face tension from people within his party trying to pull him to the left.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would disagree. I will tell you, having been around him a lot in the Senate, he is a very human contact kind of person. And, you know, he's in the basement for a good reason right now, right? COVID is raging around us. But I think critical to the dynamic that Sara's talking about is his being able to get back into human contact with folks. And I tend to agree that if he does that, he is going to follow instincts driven by his love of humans and human touch. And he'll end up back as a centrist. I believe in that circumstance.
So you see that reflected as he begins to form up his government, and how do you see that coming about?
Well, he's going to have to get his nominees confirmed, and like any president, he's going to want to have it happen fast. But I think the economic and health emergency we're in make that even more of an imperative to do. And so I think he'll be pretty strategic in looking at folks that he thinks will get confirmed. You know, most presidents have had a nominee or two fall out along the way because of something in their past that is objected to. I think he'll work really hard to keep that number as small as possible and get his core team in place. And to do that, I think he'll pick people that are more centrist, that have some experience. So there could be some people out of the woodworks, but at the highest levels, I think it'll be names that you've heard before, many of them serving in the Obama administration or even Clinton administration, or in prominent positions in state government or in private sector life. So I think it'll be reflected in his nominees that most of them are people that you wouldn't find a strong objection to, and it takes off the table some of the more controversial nominees that he may have put forward if the balance in the Senate was a little bit different.
You know, Vince, we saw that happen, I think, in our experience, and the alternating presidential party has led to kind of people coming back to government at a higher level than they were in the last administration of their party. Let me ask you this, Vince. Any comments, Vince, on that?
Yeah, I would just note, behind Sarah's comment is a critical question that has to be answered still, which is who's in the majority party in the Senate. And if it is, we got to wait for those Georgia races, right? 2 Georgia races. If Republicans win 1, then they'll be in the majority. If Democrats win 2, they'll be in the majority. If Republicans are in the majority, there will be that additional imperative for the president to name more centrist folks. He'll have a much easier path forward in that scenario. But if Chuck Schumer is the majority leader, he'll have a little bit more latitude to move nominees, candidates who come more from the left. These are sorts of things that are different from policy decisions. You're not going to have the same constellation of moderate and winger Democrats, that in a policy environment, they kind of go their own ways, but in a nominations environment, they tend to give the president deference for his selections. So the more Democratic, if it's a Democratic majority, he'll be able to move more to the left. If it's Republican, the imperative will be to move to the right.
Speaking of the Georgia elections, I've heard you comment on the fact that this could be pretty complicated when they come back into session the 3rd or 4th of January. Just kind of extrapolate on that a little bit, because I think that's an interesting issue.
Yeah, they are required to convene on January 3rd, but that's a Sunday. We think they'll find a way to convene on the 4th. And they may well convene and twiddle their thumbs, because they actually have to wait for the Georgia election, which will be held the next day on the 5th. And I don't think anybody in 2020 would assume that the results will pop out at 2 minutes past the closing of the polls. Yeah. So it could be days before we get a handle on both races. And I wonder if it won't be a little bit of time just to find out, if Republicans have won one of the races. So you'll have a scenario with members afraid to be around each other because of COVID, waiting for the results of the election because majority status hangs on it. They'll probably do some confirmation, I'm going to say confirmation votes, but confirming what they have known already, which is their leadership is going to look like the following. And it'll be the same set of folks for Democrats and Republicans: Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. They'll start thinking about what their committee structure is going to look like. And again, ratios depend on who's in the majority, so they can only go so far. Or at least they'll select their chairman and or the lead of their body, and they'll begin to think through what the ratios will look like and pick their committees. And then they have to wait. And it's not clear to me they'll be sitting around in rooms in Washington doing that waiting.
No, it reminds me of reading historically about people having to wait for the election results. We've gotten so accustomed to overnight results, and we're kind of returning to a historic period where waiting is becoming part of the operation. Talk just a little bit about President Trump. I mean, he doesn't seem like he's going to go off quietly. What do you anticipate for him and the leadership of the Republican Party, Vince?
It's a great question, and I think our own instincts and assumptions, are regularly challenged. Everything that we've been doing at Leavitt Partners is based on, what we think is a reasonable and well-informed assumption, even presumption, that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, and that we have to wait results around the Senate, but it's favoring Republicans ever so marginally, and that we'll have split government. But I had a call with somebody this morning from the White House, and that is not the common assumption over there. They are very much working as if this is an election that they can win. through a combination of recounts and judicial filings, cases, and they remain very confident that they duly won the election and that President Trump will be installed as to a second term. So, I'm just honestly a little mystified by that, but that's the reality. Meanwhile, there's a transition. Rich, you know better than anybody that these transitions have to take place. And to be honest, national security hangs in the balance. A poor transition exposes the country to some not insignificant risk if it's not done promptly and well. And so it's very smart for Joe Biden and those operating in a transition act to move as if they are going to need to be ready on January 20th. And that is the alternate reality that we're dealing with. Many assuming they need to transition and others holding on.
Sara, there's a kind of an equal situation playing out in the House. You've got Speaker Pelosi now is being tugged in different directions as well. How do you read that? How do you see that playing forward?
There's a lot of focus on that. You obviously have a small cadre of very prominent sort of fresh blood in the House that is very progressive, that wants a lot of things on the legislative front, which were never going to be possible with Trump as president and a Republican-controlled Senate. And even in the new situation of a Biden presidency and one or the other party having control in the Senate, but by a slim majority, many of those things still won't be possible. And you have a bunch of House members that won in the last cycle in Trump districts, but one from the Democratic Party. Some of them lost their seats in this election, but many of them hung on just barely. And I think they're a loud voice too, saying, you've got to stand up for our interests. We're important. We're what brought you control of the House, and you need to look out for us and not put us in a difficult situation. And I will say, I'm not sure exactly how Nancy Pelosi will handle it, but she has been pretty masterful at keeping the party together. It feels almost like ancient history now, but think back to the beginning of last Congress, and there was a funding showdown. There was a major drug pricing bill. There was impeachment proceedings. There was COVID. And through all of that, even with that wide spectrum in the party, she generally kept them together and got what she needed done and lost the few votes where she could afford to and didn't when it was important. So I think she'll find a way to pull it together, but it will be a challenge that will probably persist for a large segment of the time she's governing this Congress.
Rich.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah, Rich, it leaves in place the question of who on the Republican side will be the counterpart, right? I ultimately think while there will be attention seeking from Trump through the modes he has frankly mastered, there's still going to be the reality that where the action is, that is where the center of attention will be. There's going to be a lot of effort, if not action, in the U.S. Senate. And I think what you'll end up seeing is Mitch McConnell as de facto the leader of the Republican Party for the moment, and then new voices beginning to come forth. And it may be folks from the wing, Lee, Paul, Cruz, all mastering that voice. It may be folks more to the middle of the party. Not so much Collins and Murkowski because they don't speak up that much, but Ben Sass and Romney, Toomey and Portman, frankly. So I'm going to be interested to see where the Republican leadership, as action happens in the Senate, where that leadership voice comes.
So shifting a little bit to healthcare, just in terms of the agenda there, Sara, talk a little bit about what you see as the Democratic agenda for healthcare. And Vince, your response, I think, should be maybe factored around what the Republican kind of agenda will be.
So there's three main areas I see for Biden. First is COVID. It was such a big issue in the campaign and what drove many people in the election, and he is going to have a big job on his hands to come in and deal with an ongoing global pandemic. And you've seen he's already announced early on his coronavirus task force. He's already putting together his plans when it comes to vaccine distribution, data sharing, supply availability, making sure that the right messengers are delivering public health messages, consistent federal guidance, all those type of things. The second issue is health disparities and health outcomes in minority populations, which I think would have been an issue anyways, but has really been drawn into the forefront by what we've seen in COVID and the disparities in different populations. I think he'll be looking to address those groups, and we'll have a cabinet and leadership team that has a real focus and history on that. And then the third thing is the Affordable Care Act. And there's sort of two pieces of that. The first is undoing a lot of the things done by the Trump administration that sort of take apart various pieces of it and weaken elements of it. So he'll want to quickly undo as many of those as he can. And then there's a second front of going and trying to improve enrollment and also affordability for those who are enrolled. And many of those things, he had bigger plans that he may be able to accomplish with a split Senate or a closely divided one. But even without those, there are some things on the administrative front that he'll be able to do. So I think those are the three key areas in healthcare that he'll be focused on. And we'll have a House that's supportive of those things, and we'll work to find legislative action in the Senate where he can. I think there are areas of bipartisan agreement on some of those. So some of them may be legislative, and a lot will be done through executive action.
And we may explore that a little bit. Vince, Republican agenda.
Yeah, Republican agenda, much more poorly formed, much less formed. And they have struggled for years, maybe decades, to find a voice around a comprehensive package. And it's just been an historical weakness in the party. At those rare moments where they thought they could develop some momentum on healthcare, it turned into significant catastrophes. And most recently for Mitch McConnell was the failed effort to do repeal and replace. And those scars remain on the party, certainly on its leadership. And so avoiding the topic is job number one. I will say, in certain quarters, there are smaller initiatives, more focused initiatives that do capture the imagination of Republicans. It's nowhere near as holistic an approach as you will see on the Democratic side, but it does involve things like make sure that folks have options in care, preferably those that are coming from the market. They'll be very attracted to innovation, technology and gadgets and digital health. And will promote medical device companies, some of the great data analytics, health IT technologies, innovations that are available. They've got a concern around cost, and you'll see that play out in value-based care initiatives where for 15 years, they have very much appreciated a value orientation that says, we'll pay for things that are high quality, and we want to see transparency around what they cost. And ultimately, they'll support some of these CMMI models, value-based payment systems. But again, these are more niche oriented. They're not big comprehensive deals, and nothing wrong with the niche orientation, but it's a little bit handicapped in dealing with the big problems that we're seeing today, driven by COVID and pretty severe economic environments.
So, Sara, and when you talk, you mentioned that basically that some government is done by congressional action and some by executive order and lots by regulation. So if the Trump administration was unwinding the Affordable Care Act and the Biden administration will try to rewind it a bit, how do you see that happening, and where do you see those pieces coming together?
I think it'll be in phases. The easiest thing to do will be executive orders in the first day that stop Trump actions that were done by executive order. So you can match an executive order with another executive order. the things that are done by regulation, it is by design a process that has public input and periods required between each step. And so the Trump administration regulations that haven't been finalized can just be put on hold and not finalized. But ones that were finalized, it will be a longer process to undo. So you may see a signal early on from a Biden administration about actions they plan to take, but it will take them a while to actually put them into place. And then I think we'll also see early on some, major policy direction or guidance, which will require the departments that are affected to start taking actions, whether it's collecting data or reviewing their regulations or looking at their program evaluations. So again, you wouldn't be able to take those actions right away, but he could signal very early on what some of his important priorities are and directing his agencies to start working on those. And you'll see those play out over a matter of months or even years in some cases. So I think they're thinking right now about all three of those phases of sort of early, medium, and longer term, what they can do. And we'll try to signal early on what the approach is in all of those areas.
Thoughts, Vince?
My immediate thought was we've seen this before, right? President Obama implemented a good bit of the ACA through these sub-regulatory mechanisms. He passed the statute, and then he began to lose the congressional support that would allow him to do things through regulation or through statute. And so much of the architecture around the ACA was built on these foundations. And there was a moment after the election in 2016 where they realized, wow, this is going to come down faster than we would like. And now, we're seeing the same thing with Trump. He reversed executive action. He built it up through executive action because he didn't take the time to build public or congressional support. And here we are again. And it'll be interesting to see if Joe Biden in this centrist mode says, yeah, I'm going to move quickly. I've got to move quickly for the benefit of the American people, but I'm after that going to take the time to build public and congressional support so that it can't be degraded so rapidly 4 or 8 years from now.
So Vince, the administrations from the Bush administration on have all postulated and supported value-based healthcare in various forms. How do you see that and what is our status relative to value-based healthcare now, and how do you see that moving forward?
You're right. It has endured as an approach that Democrats and Republicans in Congress and in the administration have supported for 15 years. It has a certain momentum behind it that I think suggests it's here to stay. And there will be some retrenchment around it. But one thing that we may have learned from COVID and the economic crisis around it is that those who had approached value-based care thoughtfully and with some sophistication, in fact, had ensured their survival through very difficult times like this. At a moment when fee-for-service payments all but stopped because non-essential care was not being given, those in the value-based payment system had the flexibility to turn to new innovations, new tools, new approaches. They were still being paid through their plans and have come through relatively well, even in an extraordinarily difficult environment. I think it is here to stay for those reasons.
The one issue that we probably haven't discussed is the case of Texas versus California. Just comment generally on how you believe that is going to be resolved and the impact that it will have.
Boy, you've got three branches here that are watching this really closely. I think the justices today gave some signals that a conservative court is going to construe the statute very narrowly. And it would not surprise me if they find the individual mandate unconstitutional, but I think a conservative jurisprudence will sever that provision from the rest of the statute. The ACA will survive, the individual mandate will not, and the case could proceed forward. members of Congress are watching this really carefully. If that result that I just described is not what actually happens, they are preparing some strategies around saving the statute. And that may be through enacting protections for pre-existing conditions, protecting guaranteed issue and guaranteed renewal provisions, and other Title I provisions like community rating that maybe in the theoretical scenario the court strikes down. Sara, you may have insights into how the administration is formulating its plans on this topic.
It obviously would be a really important jackknife in the agenda if they had to deal with that. There's so much that the administration wants to do outside of that, assuming that current law stays as the baseline and ways to improve it. If they got into the zone where they had to actually work with Congress, I think there would be some bipartisan interest in shoring up some provisions of it, but depending on how sweeping the decision is, it could have really big impacts. So I think it is a major wild card to what the legislative agenda is, if it's anything other than a severability ruling.
Well, I'll just with that express appreciation for your remarkable insights and your willingness to share them with us. And we'll let you get back about your regular business and the regular order of the day for you. Thanks so much.
Rich, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Take care. We're grateful again for Sara and Vince's insights. We're grateful that you were able to join us for this Fast Break webinar today, and we'll look forward to our next webinar in January. We hope you'll join us in our Global Value-Based Healthcare Symposium scheduled for May 12th and 13th, an opportunity to truly focus on the implementation of value-based healthcare. And as always, we're grateful for our co-hosts, the David Eccles School of Business at the University of Utah and the Green Templeton College at the University of Oxford, along with our contributing sponsors. So thank you for joining us. We're grateful you could be here, and we look forward to more of these opportunities to connect on value-based healthcare. Have a good day.